G'day, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Mindful Men podcast. I'm your host, Simon Rennie, and today we're getting mindful about burnout, mental health, and how this impacts us in our family and at work as well. Now, a trigger warning that anyone who gets, triggered by burnout discussions, and I've been there before as well, feel free to skip this episode. That's perfectly okay. But if you do stick around and you do get triggered, please reach out to your support networks. And joining me today, I'm really excited. I've got Sophie Scott from Sydney. How are you going, Sophie?
Very well, Simon. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Wonderful. I'm so excited about our conversation today. I've been following you on Instagram for a little while, and I love what you do in the burnout space particularly. But to introduce you, you're a national medical reporter of the ABC, an Adjunct Associate Professor at the University of Notre Medical School. You're an author, you're a mum, a partner, and ambassador for the Bowel Cancer Australia. So it's quite a CV you've got. First of all, how do you fit all this in?
Well, it's, as any working parent would know, it's a constant juggle between some days, the family wins and some days the work wins. But I'm a bit lucky now, Simon. My children are a little bit older, which is great. And I think, when the kids were younger, I've got 4 boys. So my husband has 2 sons and I have 2 sons. So it was a bit of a juggle, but I guess you've just got to go with it and, recognize that, some days are going to be easier than others. And when it comes to doing all that, but it's also fun too. And you want to enjoy, even though it is busy with kids and having a busy life, you also want to enjoy it as well.
Yeah.
We've only got 1 son living at home now, and actually I miss all that, having everyone around. And luckily the 1 son we've got at home is very social. So he's constantly having people over, and actually he's asked whether 2 of his friends can come and stay next week. So yes, there's never a shortage of people coming and going. So I actually quite like that. So I like I think the magic is in that, in the messiness of it all. I don't like having too little to do.
Yeah, well, I'm right in the messiness. I've got a 2.5-year-old and a 5.5-year-old. We're in school holidays at the moment. I've spent half the morning on the phone to the bank, and my little 5-year-old's like, Dad, when are we going to the ninja course today? So
I'm surprised you don't have people, them scratching at the door trying to get in. Now, the only thing that scratches at the door is my dog. But no, look, I think in a lot of ways, parenting is a lot more challenging when you have younger children. I found it more challenging. I think when they're a bit older, it does get a little bit easier. And I say that to people, my friends who've got younger kids, I just say, hang in there, hang in there, because it does get easier. And I think that the golden period I found was really between about 8 and about 15, when the kids are great. They want to be around you. They're, easygoing and fun. And you've just got to, then you get the sort of teenage years, which can be a bit of a challenge. But if you get through that, then again, they turn really nice again.
I often hear people saying they're coming into the teen years and they're really stressed about that period.
Yeah, look, I think one of the biggest things that my husband and I made a really big point of doing was sitting down every night and making sure that having dinner around the table was a big focus for all the kids. No matter what else was going on, that was something that was sort of a not negotiable, that everyone had to be there for dinner and sort of, talk about what we did that day and sort of have good conversations. And I think that having that sort of anchor point and those rituals, that things like that, at the time, it doesn't seem like much, but looking back, even the kids have said that they really appreciated having that as something that they knew was going to happen every day. And it's not so much about the food that you eat, even though it's good to have good quality, healthy food, but it's more about that sense of connection with kids, particularly if you're busy and they're busy, and you want to be able to take at least one point in the day when everyone can just sit down and just share that time together. And the biggest thing that kids want is your attention and your time. They don't really want all the things that we buy them, and they really want your time and attention more than anything else.
Yeah, I had one of those moments yesterday. I was teaching Gussie how to ride his bike without training wheels. So we spent a good hour down at the netball courts, and he was determined. He kept falling off and hurting himself, and even though he was screaming out in tears because he kept hurting himself, he's like, "No, Dad, I'm not leaving until we get this right." So that was a really cool moment yesterday.
what great resilience. And like, we can learn from kids as well. Like, what a great example of not giving up. You know, as adults, we so often give up when things become challenging. You know, it's so much easier in some ways to just throw your hands in the air and say, oh, that was too difficult, I'm not going to do that. But imagine if we did that as kids. You know, we can learn from their persistence and their commitment to seeing something through. And you know, you look at, you know, toddlers learning to walk. They don't just try it once and then give it up. They just keep doing it until they get it. And that's, I think we can learn from that as well, about the value of consistency and the value of sticking with something. And you're a good example of that, Simon, because, like, you know, I get a lot of people emailing me and requests and things like that. And often if I'm too busy, I'll say, oh, look, can you just get back to me? And a lot of times people don't. They just don't get back to me. But you did. And so, like, that's when you did and you followed up. I thought, okay, well, I really appreciated that consistency and that sort of follow-up. So I said, yep, let's definitely have this chat today. Wonderful. So it's something that we can all, that sense of, you know, sticking with stuff, we can all take with us.
Yeah, I really do appreciate your time. I know you're a very busy person via CV.
Oh, no, that's fine. It's just got a couple of stories coming out next week that I'm working on today. So always something happening.
Well, let's get into a bit about you. So can you tell us a bit about, I know you're in Sydney at the moment, but did you grow up in Sydney? Tell us a bit about some of those key moments that led you to working at the ABC and doing the stuff that you do.
So yes, I did. I grew up in Sydney, on the lower North Shore of Sydney, and I lived in Australia for most of my life. But then I did go and live in the United States for 5 years, which was a great experience. And I actually had both my children in the US, one in Washington, DC, and one in Los Angeles. And that was a really eye-opening experience to live in another country. And I really recommend it to people to have that experience if you can. And, you know, often we can be quite disparaging of the United States. But one thing I really loved about living there was the sense that a lot of Americans have that anything is possible. And they really encourage success, and they really encourage individual excellence and, you know, striving to be your best. And that's something that's really nurtured in people. And so that's something that I really took from that experience living in the United States, whereas sometimes in Australia, we're not quite as encouraging of other people to sort of stand out and be their best. But the US really is. And so I loved that from a sort of personal development point of view. I loved that sort of sense of encouraging people to do the best that they can, and not, you know, and setting big goals as well. You know, and one of my sons, my husband's sons that lives in the US at the moment, has really taken that on board and decided to apply for an MBA and ended up getting into Harvard. And so, you know, you just never know what's possible until you try. And I really love that approach that they take over there. But so I lived in the US for 5 years and then moved back to Australia and lived in Tasmania for a while. And that's when I started working for the ABC in Tasmania. Then I was covering, first of all, science, and then moved into health. And the reason I love health and now mental health, but just health generally, is you get to tell very sort of inspiring and positive stories. If you think about journalism, a lot of it's quite negative, you know, whether it's you're covering crime or politics, it tends to be more focused on the negative side of things. But with health, you're really focused on, it can be, you know, things like a medical breakthrough or a clinical trial that's helping people, or so you're often offering solutions for people. And I really enjoyed that, to be able to offer some more positive content for people. And that's why I've really enjoyed covering health over the years. It's been a great area to focus on. And now I've sort of shifted a little bit into focusing on mental health more than physical health, because I just really recognize that, particularly over the last few years, people, and this might be why you started the podcast as well, but, you know, a lot of people have really struggled with their mental health and struggled to get help and support. And the more you can offer any tools or tips for people, and even if it's just one little thing that they can take from something that you might put on Instagram or a conversation you might have on a podcast that gives people that sense of, oh, maybe I'll just put that into practice and I'll take that on board. And and then, you know, one small thing can actually really change things up for people. Often we think you're going to have to make big changes in your life. You think you're going to have to change everything to change your mood, but often it can be really small little actions and rituals and practices that actually make a really big difference to how you feel. It's the small things that really count.
Yeah, and that's what really shines through on your Instagram account, those little tips that you provide, and I love them because it's all the stuff that I was doing when I was recovering from burnout as well. And I love sharing that around and talking to people about just those easy things and mindfulness-based approaches that they can do without even anyone even noticing that they're doing it as well. You can do it on the go.
Yeah, that's right. Like even deep breathing exercises and things like that you don't have to sit in a quiet room for an hour and meditate. It can just be a matter of taking a few moments to do some deep breathing and regulating your nervous system a little bit more so that you're able to handle the stress that is thrown at us every day. And I think the thing about some of these techniques, it's not about we can't get rid of stress. In fact, a little bit of stress is good for you. It helps you perform, but it's about being able to manage, the ongoing stress that we all have in our busy lives, and being able to have a more regulated nervous system, whether that's through, getting regular exercise or meditation and those sort of practices. It just means that you're better able to handle what life throws at you.
Yeah.
And that's something that everyone can benefit from.
Yeah, definitely. Now you've got a burnout story, and that's why I was interested to have you on the show because you're right. I did start the podcast as part of my burnout recovery and sharing my burnout story and my mental health story of over 30 years. So I'd love to hear your perspective of what burnout was for you and how did it show up and some of those coping mechanisms that you put in place to recover from that.
Yeah, so I mean, as you know, burnout is something that it's not just a matter of feeling a little bit tired and stressed. Burnout is really when you start to have physical and emotional symptoms of exhaustion. You can feel like you are not effective in your work anymore. You start to feel like you doubt your own abilities. And then you can also have quite significant physical and even cognitive impacts. There was a really good study by Professor Gordon Parker that was done called the Sydney Burnout Study. And he found that at least a third of people with burnout suffered pretty significant cognitive dysfunction. So this is it's a relatively serious condition that burnout can, you can end up feeling pretty crappy. So with me, what happened was, you listed all the things that I do, and I do have a pretty busy life, and often people who are very passionate about their job. So people in the caregiving professions, like social work, like teaching, like first responders, healthcare workers, they're at much higher risk of burnout because you do put so much of yourself into your work. And while that can be very admirable, it also puts you at high risk of burnout because what it means is you don't have those boundaries in place, and you're answering the phone and emails after work hours. You're getting text messages on weekends, and you're not giving yourself the time to really rest and recover and get your nervous system back to a regulated state so that you can then deal with the next week of whatever you're dealing with. And that's sort of what happened to me. I was just not putting those boundaries in place and really sort of spending too much time working. And you think you're coping well. That's the thing with burnout. It does sort of creep up on you, and you probably found the same. You think you're coping fine until you realize that you're not. And often it can be physical illnesses and physical sensations that the body almost sort of tells you something's not right here. And the body can just be saying, look, enough is enough. I can't deal with it anymore. And for some people, it can be, it can be a range of things that happen, but often it can be things to do with your autonomic nervous system. So that's to do with your heart rate or your breathing and your digestion. These are the things that can start to go haywire when you do have sort of more severe signs of burnout. And so that's what happened to me. I was actually speaking at an event with healthcare workers, and I stood up at the podium to give out these awards, and I just had this massive wave of dizziness just hit me out of nowhere, like really severe. And I thought I was going to topple into the audience and end up on someone's lap. And luckily I sort of managed to get through the event. But that was a real wake-up call to me that my body was saying, this is not sustainable anymore. You can't just keep going the way you are. And the thing is, we all want to feel well. We all want to feel like we're thriving. And you can't, if you're feeling physically or emotionally exhausted like you do when you're in burnout, that's the opposite of thriving. That's just sort of getting through every day. And that means you're not being the best version of yourself for all the people that you really care about. So often it can be that extrinsic motivation. So thinking about wanting to be the best parent and the best partner and the best friend, you can't do that if you're completely burnt out. And so
Yeah.
you need to sort of take a step back and start that sort of slow steps to recovery. And it is
Yeah.
possible to recover, but it does take acknowledgement that that something's wrong and that you do need to take steps to sort of get better.
Had you ever experienced something like that before? Because I remember when I experienced it, like just saying the words burnout, I've never spoken about burnout. And whenever I did hear about burnout, it was like you've kind of shrugged it off and think, oh, if someone says they're feeling burnt out, that they just can't handle their workloads. But when you actually experience it, like I like literally mentally and physically hit a wall and I just couldn't, I stopped functioning for about 4 months.
Yeah, and look, that's exactly right. And the important thing to say about burnout is that it's not a sign of a personal failing or an
Hmm.
individual's problem. It's a sign that there's some systemic issues going on in terms of people's workload and the support that they're getting to be able to manage that workload. And burnout is primarily, the literature is primarily, mainly done in a workplace setting, even though you can feel burnout in other settings, like as a carer.
Hmm.
But there's a couple of key components of burnout, and that includes that lack of support. It can include sort of overwhelming demands and lack of resources to deal with it, and also a lack of recognition. And that's not necessarily about a lack of salary or pay, but just really a lack of acknowledgement of the good work that people are doing. And that's something
Yeah.
that healthcare workers who have felt burnt out often reflect, that they feel that like their work doesn't really go acknowledged in terms of what they're doing. And yes, it can be very debilitating for people, and through no fault of their own. And the research has shown that, for example, even the most resilient of medical students, when they're studying, then they've looked at when they've gone on to become doctors, they found even the most resilient of medical students had the same levels of burnout when they were placed in a very toxic or
Mm.
under-resourced health system. And so that shows us that it's not an individual failing, it's a failing on the system to properly support the people who are trying to do good work.
Yeah, definitely. And I felt like mine was to a large extent the workplace that I worked in. I worked in a public service, high KPI environment, but also I was studying part-time my Masters of Social Work. We had two young kids during that time. Halfway through my degree, we had COVID lockdowns, and so we were all at home 24/7 and trying to navigate life as a young family and keep everyone entertained and all that type of stuff. So I felt like it was burning candles at both ends, but like multiple candles, not just a workplace thing. It felt like it was a life, issue, that there was self-care lacking in a lot of spaces as well. But what did your recovery look like? Did you have to take time away from work, or did you, see therapy, or did you implement some self-care routines?
So I did a couple of things. The first thing I did was sort of delve into it a bit more, and looking at the literature and looking at what would work, and thinking about what are the things that I can control and what are the things that I can't. And you can't necessarily change systems, but you can do things to help yourself feel better. And so the things that, when I first started, I didn't have a huge amount of energy, and so I
Mm.
wasn't really able to do much exercise at all. I was only able to do sort of Tai Chi and things in the morning. That was all I could manage, but even doing that helped me feel better.
Yeah.
And then really committing to regular meditation and regular sort of things that I knew were going to help not only help your nervous system become more regulated, but also help your brain function and your mood. And the other thing that really makes a difference is often when you're feeling very depleted, like you are when you're burnt out, you need to think about what are the things that are going to sort of fill you with joy and sort of fill
Mm.
that bucket of happiness. And often one thing that can make a big difference is feeling that sense of connection with people, feeling, and it can be even just picking up the phone and talking to somebody, even if you don't have the energy to go and see someone in person, just picking up the phone and having a conversation with someone who you really care about. and who cares about you as well, and
Yeah.
prioritizing those things. And because what can happen when we're busy is, we put everyone else's needs first, and then those things that make us feel better, like catching up with someone for coffee, they fall to the bottom of your list, and then they fall off the list and then they just don't
Yeah.
happen. And so that's why we need to be thinking about those things, and just there only needs to be small actions. It doesn't have to be a huge thing, but even just saying, I'm going to think about, a friend I haven't spoken to for a while. I'm going to pick up the phone. I'm going to give them a call, even if it's been a while. I'm still going to give them a call and just have that conversation, because I know whenever I talk to them, I feel so much better afterwards, and they'll
Yeah.
probably feel better too.
I'm glad you brought up joy, because when you do feel burnout, you lose the joy, and you become quite cynical of a lot of things. And so for me, one of the things I used to do was I dedicated an hour of a day where I'd go for a walk. Now I'm more of a runner, but I felt like my body couldn't run at that time. So I was just walking, and I was doing a mindfulness based walking where I was, really taking in the environment. So brushing my hands along trees to get that feeling in my hands, to ground myself in the moment, or smelling the flowers as we're walking past, if it was spring at the time. Or really just taking notice of the warmth on my skin as well. And even walking in the rain. I hate going out in the rain, but I made myself a few times walk in the rain purposely, just to feel almost like alive again, and feel like, oh, there's something more than just what's happening in my head and my
Yes.
body, that I'm part of something a lot bigger. But
And
joy is something that, yeah, certainly a lot of people
yeah.
lose.
And
Yeah.
and for me, one of the things I love is being near the water. So I found going down to be near the beach,
Mm.
doing regular walks near the beach, was something that was very uplifting for me. And you're right to sort of think, when you're feeling depleted like that, the last thing you need is to be, jogging and running and putting more stress on your body. You need to be thinking gentle exercise. What's the sort of smallest action you can do that's actually going to make a difference? And walking is a great example. And thinking about what really is, it's very individual. I think about what's going to bring you joy. For me, it's being near the water. I love being near the beach and going to see the water, and it's very calming for your nervous system. And for other people, it's about getting out into nature and going for a walk, where it's green. And yeah, so everyone's got a slightly different things that will make them feel great, but you just need to prioritize those small actions, because it really does add up. Little small actions like that, like you going for a walk and taking the time just to really care for yourself, it does make a huge difference.
Yeah. Now, what about in the household? So you've got a household full of boys, or you had a household full of boys, and you were going through burnout. Like, what was the support like coming from the guys? Because, guys, we don't traditionally know how to talk about our emotions or feelings, or mental health in particular. But what was it like in your household? I'd love to hear that story.
Oh, look, it was good. I've been very lucky with the four boys that we have. We sort of, because of necessity, we raised them that they had to sort of be contributing members of the household, even from a pretty young age. So just because my husband ran a couple of businesses as well, so he was pretty busy. So it wasn't like we could do everything for them. And so they were very good at sort of stepping up and being, really helping run the house. And they're all good examples of, particularly if the earlier you can start with kids to help them understand that, you're all in this together. You're a family unit. It's not, the parents at the top doing everything for the kids and the kids just sitting back and being passive members. The more you can get kids involved. And, I stopped doing the kids' washing, for example, when they were like in early high school. Like I didn't do any of their washing from about, when they started high school. I said, you're responsible for your own washing. I'm not going to be washing for boys all their clothes, all their sports clothes. You're responsible. If it doesn't get washed, if you don't do it, it's not going to get washed, basically. And so that's just one example of making sure that they were stepping up and taking responsibility for things. And it does make a huge difference. It helps them be more rounded as adults, and it helps them when they do move out and have to fend for themselves. They're not all of a sudden going, oh, what's this thing called a washing machine? How do I use this? You're actually doing them a big favor, and you're doing them a disservice. But, you think at the time you're doing them a favor if you do everything for kids. but you're actually doing them a disservice. So I would just say, empower your kids to be independent and responsible for themselves in terms of looking after themselves, and then they will get a kick out of it as well, knowing they can do those things for themselves.
Yeah, and given your experience with burnout, but also your professional career as well, like, did you ever have discussions around the dinner table around mental health or health in general?
Oh yeah, look, 100%. We always were very open about talking about it, how people were feeling and their emotions, and anxiety, because anxiety is really common with with teenagers in particular. And so we always wanted them to be able to let us know how they were feeling, and feel like they could tell us anything. That's the thing. You want your kids to feel like no matter what's on their mind, that they can tell you. And the kids were always open and always able to share what they were going through. And so that was good, because that way, at least they're telling you what's happening. They've got a sounding board, and yeah, that's, I think, having those discussions, which tend to be more one-on-one rather than in the whole group. Because we had some discussions as a group, but certainly we would have those one-on-one discussions with all the kids about how they were feeling and whether they were going through something in particular. One of my husband's sons did have anxiety when he was sort of an early teenager, and he had a lot of social anxiety. So he'd get very nervous. He wouldn't want to go to events with people. And so when he left school, he decided to get over it. He decided that he would work in retail to force himself to have to interact with strangers. So that was his way. He wanted to throw himself in the deep end and thought, this is the perfect way. I'll have to talk to strangers every single day. And that actually worked really well. So much so that he went from doing that to thinking, well, I like talking to strangers. I'm going to take it one step further, and I want to get really confident. So I'm going to study acting. I'm going to study acting so I can be confident being on a stage. And he did that and got in with an amazing acting coach and just really flourished. And now he's actually studying at Notre. He got into Notre, which is Australia's best drama school. So he went from, being really anxious and not wanting to talk to strangers to now being on stage and screen and, wanting to take on the world as an actor. So you just never know where people are going to end up, and how sometimes what can seem like a challenge, like social anxiety, can actually turn into something that you can use as a strength.
Yeah, and I guess that highlights the importance of support networks to encourage us to get out, but we can't do that unless we open up and have those honest conversations about how we're going, how we're tracking, what's causing us
100%.
stress.
And I remember at one point he was doing something in between, before he started working in retail. He's very talented as an artist, and he was working as a graphic artist, studying graphic art, but he was absolutely miserable. He absolutely hated it. And I said to him, well, you could tell he was just not happy. And I said, if you're not happy, you don't need to stick with this. You've given it a go and you've realized it's not for you. So, I'm so glad that he spoke up and said, I'm really not enjoying this. It's not where I want to be, and I want to shift into something different. And then he did, and now he's going so well. So, but if he'd just sort of kept to himself and been miserable, he wouldn't have ended up doing as well as he has, and being as happy within himself. So being able to speak up is just so important, whether it's to a friend, whether it's to a parent. You've got to have those outlets of someone that you can have those sort of frank conversations with.
Yeah, and I guess on an extension from that, one, it goes to show the value of connected parenting and parenting that's engaging with our kids and so forth. But on that note of support, like thinking about your journey and your family's journey as well, and your workplace experience, if you could picture someone who's experiencing something like burnout or anxiety or another mental health condition, and they've been struggling for a long time and they've never talked about it, what's some advice that you could give them to help encourage them to seek out some support?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing is to recognize that seeking support is really a sign of strength rather than a sign of weakness. So being able to say to someone, I'm not coping, or this is not going well, shows that you have an inner strength and you want things to be better. And to think about is there someone in the past that you've been able to turn to who's helped you? Is there, whether it's someone in your family or if it's at the workplace, someone at your workplace? And if not, then to seek out, professional help as well. Because often seeking someone independent, like a therapist or a social worker or a counselor, can really help you see the bigger picture and help you put things in perspective. And it can be good to have both, really. It can be good to have someone in your family or friends, but then also getting that professional help can be very, very beneficial as well. And sometimes if you're really struggling, getting the professional help that can be the difference in helping you feel so much better.
Yeah, and definitely that professional help is also, they're independent from your family situation or your friendship group, which means they can give you that unbiased opinion about what's going on.
Exactly. Yeah. And then in that way that you keep your friends as, definitely let your friends know that you're not, if you're not coping, but, it can be good to keep your friendship interactions, for that sense of joy that we talked about. And then you can make sure that you're getting that support you need from a professional. And also the other good thing is, like, as you've noticed there's a lot of podcasts you can listen to that are very uplifting and informative. Because it is difficult, in Australia and other parts of the world sometimes to get access to go and see a professional for mental health help. So if that is an issue, there are other ways you can get support as well.
Definitely. And that's what I love about podcasts, is that we can share our stories across the globe. Like this morning, I was on the phone to someone in New York. I've been on Arizona this morning as well, and now in Sydney. And then tonight I'm going to the UK, all from my room.
So good. That's amazing. And it's such a universal experience. That's the thing. I think one thing as humans, we think that what we're going through is just special to us.
Yes.
But what you realize is that, and that's called the spotlight effect, you think that, you think everyone's thinking about you, but they're actually just thinking about themselves. So, but our experience is much more universal than we realize. And listening to people talking about their experience, and you think, oh, wow, that's exactly how I feel. And then you don't feel quite so alone. And particularly stories of recovery are important, to see that you can get through challenging periods and come out the other side.
Yes.
You can get through it with the right support. And, also thinking about what are the influences around you. So I love listening to motivational podcasts and inspirational ones, and because then that influences your brain chemistry and how you feel, and sort of what you focus on is what you become. And if you want to be happy and healthy and thriving, then that's what you need to be surrounded by.
That's right. Good news in, and then it feels good. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. If you're surrounded by negativity, it's very hard to sort of withstand that. So you've got to build that buffer of positivity around you, and it can make a huge difference. I know that I like to listen to different podcasts and with people telling their stories, and you feel like, as long as if you get one thing from one interview or one podcast, then you think, wow, that was great. I'm going to put that into practice.
Yeah, definitely. And I've got so much value, and that's where I found you is your chats on other podcasts, and then through your Instagram as well. So it does do wonders, and it, as you said, it makes us feel less alone in the world. And the spotlight isn't on us; it's on everybody. And exactly. We've all got different experiences. Now, Sophie, I could talk to you all day, but I appreciate you've got a lot on your plate. So how can people get in touch if they want to hear more about you or learn more about you?
Sure. So there's a few ways. If you're on Instagram, definitely pop over there. And my Instagram is Sophie Scott and the number 2. And then I've got a website which has a lot of resources, and that's just sophiescott.com.au. I write a newsletter every 2 weeks where I collate some of the information that we've been talking about, and I send that out to all my subscribers for free. So you can jump on the website and subscribe to the blog, and that's another way of just getting this sort of information we've talked about with lots of resources. And it's just another way of getting information out to people. And I think the good thing about what I try to do is put out evidence-based information. So I always include like the scientific references. That way, if people are interested, they can then go and read the whole study. They can get a bit more information themselves. But ideally, you want people to have the sort of tools and techniques at their fingertips that are really easy to put into practice. and not more onerous, particularly if you're feeling overwhelmed. The last thing you want to do is like, oh, great, now she's telling me I've got to go and meditate for an hour or do this for an hour or whatever. So, short little periods during the day, just little moments you can take to help yourself feel better, and being consistent with it. That's what really makes a big difference.
Yeah, wonderful. Wonderful. I'll put the links to the website and your socials in the show notes. But the last question I'll leave you with is plug something that makes you feel good. And it doesn't have to be around mental health or burnout. It could just be something that you're watching on telly or listening to or reading or whatever you like.
Oh, look, there's so many things that I'm doing at the moment that do make me feel good. I guess, one of the things that I love doing is not only listening to other people's meditations, but writing my own meditations as well. And so I've just started doing that, and I've uploaded them to the world's biggest meditation app is called Insight Timer.
Mm-hmm.
So if I would love people to listen to, if they're interested in meditation. I've got one on anxiety, the nervous system, and I'm about to record a couple on sleep and gratitude and a whole lot of other topics that people are really keen on. So if you don't have a regular meditation practice, I would recommend that app, because there's so many amazing teachers on it. It's all free, doesn't cost anything. You can listen to and download as many as you want for free. And I just love that sense of being able to sort of pick and choose what you like and find something that really suits you. And so being able to put out things that help people, like a meditation, is something that I find that's really making me happy at the moment.
Awesome. I love it. I'll put the link into that as well. So, Sophie, thanks so much for taking some time out of your day to have a chat with me. I've really appreciated your time, and I love what you're doing, and I'm going to sign up to your newsletter actually and get on to all of that. That sounds really awesome. So thank you so much.
Keep up the good work too, and spreading the message about being mindful. And I really appreciate your focus on men's mental health. And I think it's something that we really need. This is a conversation for everybody to be part of, including men. And I think there's the mum of 4 boys. It's a really important topic. So good on you for shining a light on this important issue.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure that you like it and leave a comment, and then share it with your mates. Also, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss a moment of future episodes to come.